Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonya.
And I'm Kari. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Sonya.
Hi, Kari. We're talking about broccoli, which I feel like most people love, with rare exception, like my grandfather used to hate it, actually.
I mean, broccoli might be my favorite vegetable.
Really?
It's definitely in my top 3.
I just think it's like a go-to. It's like a workhorse of the kitchen. It makes you feel good. It's easy to make. There's so many ways to modify it, make it taste good.
Yeah, and I think like there's a little bit of, if you have a little broccoli each day, it's like very virtuous, right? You're just like, okay, I got some like good stuff in my body,
I
but
know.
it's
I
delicious.
love how Jonathan has penetrated us with this virtuous idea. It's like when he said it, and I can't ever get it out of my head that like when you eat good things, you feel virtuous.
You
Like
feel virtuous.
he's also like when you go to the dentist, you feel virtuous, and when you get your oil changed in your car, you feel virtuous. And
Uh,
it's like seeped into every conversation. I love it. And I love it this time of year because I think we're all looking to feel a little more virtuous after the decadence and maybe gluttony and
yeah.
maybe excess of the holiday season, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, or just like when you're starting the new year too, you really want, or just like starting a restart of your week, of your month, anything like just a little bowl of broccoli, like sets you straight. And I will
Totally.
say there's so many delicious ways to make broccoli. There really are. And so like, let's get into it.
Let's get into it because I think it's so much more than just steamed or plain roasted. And I'm going to get ideas from you, I'm sure, but I'm going to throw one out there that I recently tried. So, do you know this like fad of like smashed crispy Parmesan vegetables? Like people make them with cauliflower, people make them with potatoes, but they also make them with broccoli.
I think I'm very mildly aware of this. I mean, I love like just taking a pile of Parmesan and baking it, and then it becomes a
Yes.
crispy thing. And so the idea that someone would then apply that to vegetables seems like a real like winning combination to me.
Well, what I love about it is it's two ingredients. Like,
Right, right.
so basically this is crispy smashed broccoli. Sometimes people call it like broccoli parmesan. There's different names for it, but it's very much exactly what we're talking about. And all you have to do is get a couple heads of broccoli and you cut them up into pretty big piece florets because you don't want them to be too small and delicate. And then what you do is you blanch them for 2 minutes. This is, I think, the only annoying thing about this kind of recipe is it does require getting out a pot and then putting something in the oven. But for 2 ingredients and for under half an hour, I feel like this is worth it as a side dish. So
Yeah,
you blanch your broccoli florets for 2 minutes, 2 to 3, just till they turn like bright green and soften a bit. You rinse them off, you get them cooled down, and then you make little piles of grated Parmesan cheese onto like a lined baking sheet. And you could use pecorino too. It doesn't just have to be Parmesan. I think you could even try cheddar, honestly, and it would maybe be not as crispy, but it would
ooh,
work.
that's fun.
Yeah, but definitely Parmesan works because when Parmesan bakes, it does turn into this cracker, like a, what's it called? Frico?
Yeah, frico, Parmesan frico. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's the same concept. So you make these little mounds of the grated Parmesan, and then you take those blanched broccoli florets, you place them on the mound, and you take the bottom of a glass or a jar and you smash it, which is fun, which is like fun on a weeknight, right? And then you pop that in a 400-degree oven for 20 minutes. It's really fast. And what happens is the broccoli kind of bakes into the Parmesan, and there's that layer of like crackly frico of that like Parmesan cracker on, below a perfectly roasted piece of broccoli that's still green, that's not too charred. And I like to like flip them over immediately so that little cracker's on top and doesn't get soggy. And
Right.
we love this as a side. We had it as a side with like a simple pasta dish. It was so fun.
I mean, I think you had me at like crackery, crispy frico with, roasted broccoli. Cause there's something too about like roasting broccoli. It just becomes sweeter. And so
Yeah.
there's like this sort of sweetness with this like salty crunchiness. And I'm really glad to hear you. I mean, this is so simple to do, but I'm really glad to hear you talk about the process because my instinct before you described it was like I would just roast broccoli and then like throw parmesan on top of it, which I think no one's mad
Oh.
at either. But the idea that you would kind of make this little nest of parmesan, which then of course is on like your metal baking sheet in a hot oven, so that's melting, and then you're sort of smashing the vegetable into it. I mean, there's something about like creating more of that surface area because broccoli is like a tree, right? And so like you're kind of making it this flattened piece, which resonates with me as someone who loves to make like a crispy roasted flattened potato because then it's like it's larger, there's more surface area to get onto that hot pan.
You definitely have to do it on the bottom. It's a different experience on the top. Then it's just like garlic roasted broccoli. Sorry, not
Then it's just
garlic.
melted, yeah,
That
it's
is just
melted cheese.
Parmesan broccoli, which I feel like everyone has done. This is definitely like cracker form. And
Yes.
I will say I forgot to mention one thing. It is 2 ingredients, but when I served it, I just felt like it would be nice to have a drizzle of lemon just at the last second before eating it because I love a little acidity in my broccoli, and I thought that was really nice. Like lemon and parmesan and broccoli, the combination just works for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think most people keep Parmesan in their fridge, and broccoli is also, I think this is why it's one of the most popular vegetables is like you can get it anywhere. You can definitely buy it at the farmer's market. You can buy it at any single grocery store. It also lasts in your fridge, and not as long as like cabbage or cauliflower, but a head of broccoli will last you easily a week if you get it fresh.
Yeah, or longer. So what is one of your go-to broccoli recipes?
Well, I would say my version of that, it's actually somewhat similar, but it's just a vegan version, which, I didn't think of this, but like I love roasted broccoli. I still remember like discovering roasted broccoli like in my 20s. And it's funny, my mom was even saying to me like, "I remember the first time you made roasted broccoli for me and it kind of changed the way I think about broccoli because I grew up eating it like steamed and with cheese sauce and it just like was kind of always it was kind of always a necessity, not something that was a pleasure. And I think I discovered that roasted broccoli is such a pleasure. And a couple years ago, maybe more than a couple years ago, I started tossing my broccoli, of course, with olive oil, but also with nutritional yeast. And then I usually like to add garlic salt and maybe a little bit of paprika. And I kind of think it's like broccoli popcorn. It's like you cut it up into little pieces, you toss it with oil, you add like a good amount of nutritional yeast, which, I think people generally describe nutritional yeast as like a cheesy flavor. And I kind of agree with that. I would actually say it's just more umami. Like it just like adds this like richness.
Yeah, I
And
don't I don't always buy that, like, it's an exact swap for Parmesan,
no,
but I do think it has, like, that kind of nuttiness that's in Parmesan, but Parmesan also is umami, so I think you're
yes,
absolutely right. It's the same idea.
it's the same idea, and, and a little bit of garlic goes a long way, and so that's my go-to way of, like, roasting broccoli,
So
like,
you
at
do,
this
like,
point
tiny florets, and you put them on a lined baking sheet or just straight onto a baking sheet, and then you just are you doing it at a high temperature?
I do it so what I think the piece that I would wanna offer as a tip is, like, I like to put it all into a bowl because you really wanna get it all mixed up really well, and I personally like to cut them into really small pieces because then you kind of add, like, a couple tablespoons full, like a good amount, depending on how much broccoli you have, a good amount of nutritional yeast, like, don't skimp here, and then add some I have garlic powder, I add some salt, if you've got a little paprika, sometimes I add oregano to that. But like it also needs like a generous dousing of olive oil because that's also what helps all the nutritional yeast and spices stick to the broccoli. And then you want to spread it out again, like any kind of roasting, you want space on that on your tray. And for my family, like we easily eat 2 trays of this. And so, you on your baking sheet and, high temperature, I'm always like I flirt in the 450 range because I like it to be crispy on the outside, maybe a little bit of tenderness in the inside, but like we like it more on the crispy side.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like the size of the floret affects the texture, and so like for the crispy broccoli I was describing, you really want bigger pieces to get flattened out, but for those little roasty broccoli, it's nice to have them bite-sized. And I love the term popcorn broccoli because that already makes it sound more fun.
It
If you're
sounds more
serving that,
fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're serving that to a kid, I could see how they would be really into that even as a concept. It would make them excited to eat the broccoli.
Well, we've talked about that, like naming what you're cooking in a fun way and an enticing way, like makes it, by the way, I know exactly what I'm doing and it makes me feel like it's going to be a better dish if I call it broccoli popcorn, you know?
Definitely. I mean, I love a roasted broccoli. I also like to roast at around 400 to 425, 450, depending on what I'm making. There's a sheet pan meal that heavily features broccolini. That's from my cookbook, but it could be broccolini or broccoli. It doesn't matter. I think broccolini is also called broccoli rabe. It's a different plant. It's not like from the same broccoli plant, but the flavor is so similar, but the texture is different. So broccolini, broccoli rabe tends to be like thinner, a little woodsier, and but the florets are actually more delicate and it can have a slight bitterness in a good way, I think. Whereas broccoli is sweeter and fluffier and has a thicker bottoms, thicker stems. So you can make this recipe with either, but I wrote it for broccolini. But I think I've mentioned it once before, but it's one of my go-to sheet pan meals. And it's a roasted chickpea and tofu and broccolini sheet pan meal. So everything goes on one sheet pan. You're not getting out multiple pots for this. You're coating your tofu cubes in harissa paste and also in potato starch or cornstarch to help it get crispy in the oven. It really makes a big difference with the texture. Then you're coating those chickpeas also in harissa paste, which is like just such a fun way to eat a chickpea. It gets all kind of caramelized and like browned and spiced. And then you actually can add harissa to the broccoli, but I like to keep that separate, like just keep it kind of green and lush next to this spice laden chickpea and tofu. And you can make this just with chickpeas. You could make it just with tofu, but the broccoli you have to have. Like that has to be part of the tray.
Right, right. I mean, I just to stop you for a second, like the picture of this dish from your cookbook is really one of my favorite in your cookbook. It's such a stunning presentation for something which is really just like a weeknight meal. You know what I mean? It's
Thank
really from
you.
like basic pantry ingredients that you have, like a block of tofu in your fridge lasts for months. You know, you've got some broccoli and then harissa paste. It's like the combination of the red and the white and the green is like, I don't know, it's like a feast for the eyes too.
And it feels special on a weeknight. Like it takes, 10 minutes to throw together. It
Right.
spends, I think, less than half an hour in the oven. It's so easy to whip up. And so I think investing in like a good harissa paste, like I like the New York Shook brand personally. It's a little pricier than some of the other ones you might find, but it's so worth it. And you don't need a ton of it for any dish. So it can last a long time in your fridge. So that's like, I just think there's something about the combination of chickpeas and broccoli that really goes well together.
Well, I'm so glad you said that because my next dish is also broccoli and chickpea. And what's funny is this is a recent discovery that actually came from our cookbook episode. After we shared our cookbook episode, one of my close friends I see every week, who's also like a very avid home cook, gave me one of her favorite cookbooks because she was laughing at how obscure some of my favorite cookbooks are.
By the
And
way,
she
I have to stop you because I have heard from several people they've never ever heard of the cookbooks you share, which I kind of love. This is one of my favorite things about you is that you have perspectives not everyone has, and I love that.
Well, what's interesting about my friend Maylin is that she gave me this cookbook and she said like, you know, she goes, I think you're going to be surprised that this is one of my favorite cookbooks. She goes, even I'm surprised it's one of my favorite cookbooks. But she said, I go back to it every time. And she also did me the service of like taking post-it notes and marking all these recipes that she constantly cooks out of it. So one of the cookbook is called Cook Beautiful by Athena Calderon. And it's a feast for the eyes. Like the photography is absolutely gorgeous. And I can see why she likes it because you kind of go through and there's really nothing in the cookbook that's like, oh, I wouldn't couldn't do that. It's very simple, but it's just so thoughtfully put together. So this is a roasted broccoli, roasted chickpea dish. While the broccoli and the chickpeas are roasting in the oven, you make a simple relish with cilantro, jalapeno, scallions, and then a little bit of lime juice and honey. So
Oh.
instead of being like, and you could also just throw all of this into your food processor and make this into a green sauce. But I kind of like the roughness of this. And so, again, if you start with your broccoli, you can just do plain broccoli. You can spice your chickpeas, you can make your chickpeas plain, but that you really want that crispiness of the chickpeas. And this is also to me a weeknight meal where you have broccoli and chickpeas, you add this like fresh sauce on top, and then you sprinkle it with feta. But this is also great for like a buffet setup. Like if you're having
Oh,
like a dinner
yeah.
party, and I would make the argument, I in this picture in the cookbook, she also uses a broccolini. So it's like the long, it's sort of like a long stem with like a beautiful top on it. And I can very much imagine myself picking that up and eating it, like you would eat like a big romaine lettuce leaf, or, like a chicken leg almost. But if you just have regular broccoli, just chop up your broccoli, roast it, get some chickpeas, roast your chickpeas, spice them if you like. And then this sauce is just, it's like the brightness that you want. Lime juice, honey, jalapeno, cilantro. It's like all these really bright flavors with two things that are very roasty. And then like a salted feta. I mean, it's like an amazing combination.
It sounds great for a potluck or for a spread. I think that note, though, of some kind of herbaceous element as herb sauce, if you can spend some time on a Sunday and make one herb sauce in your fridge, it is so nice to just take any plain roasted vegetable, like what you were describing with that relish. I would put that on a roasted sweet potato. I would
Yes.
put that on roasted cauliflower. I love it for broccoli and chickpeas. And I love the idea of just simply roasting chickpeas, simply roasting broccoli, and then you have the sauce that maybe you even made ahead, and it's also something you could serve hot or at room temperature. You could crumble feta on at the last minute. It's a really smart dish. I get why your friend loves this book.
Yeah.
That's really it's so nice to have that too, to have someone not just give you a cookbook, but tell you what they make out of it. What a thoughtful food friend.
It's such a gift.
We've talked a lot about roasted broccoli. I don't want to forget about raw broccoli, even though, or
I
okay,
have mixed feelings.
I have
I'm
mixed
gonna be
feelings.
honest.
I love the broccoli spoon salad, which we've talked about many times that you introduced to us. Um, you found this New York Times broccoli spoon salad recipe. You brought it to us. It's delicious. It involves raw broccoli. We'll link that. And we've talked about it many, many times. I love a broccoli salad in general. That's like the one place where I can accept raw broccoli. Although I found a broccoli salad that involves like just barely cooked broccoli. So
Okay. I'm listening.
it's really interesting. It's from Hetty Louise McKinnon, who I think is just one of our great geniuses of vegetable cookery right now.
I
You
completely
know,
agree. Yes, I really trust her recipes. I do.
I trust her recipes. I feel like she's in the canon of Ottolenghi and Alice Waters and all these people who brought in all this vegetable cookery into the mainstream and made it exciting. And Deborah Madison, of course, is another one.
Yes.
But so this recipe comes from her. It is a broccoli, date, and pistachio salad. But the details of this recipe are what matter. Like already it sounds good, right?
It
Broccoli
already sounds good. I mean, like the sweet, it really hits those sweet notes too, because, there's also that classic broccoli salad that has like a sweet dressing that, sometimes you put grapes and
or
bacon into it, or
cranberries. Yeah.
cranberries, or like the cranberries or dried sour cherries that Sola puts into hers. I think that bitter and sweet is a great combination. So the idea that you would do dates and some pistachios, I'm already so in for this.
Right, and that traditional kind of sweet broccoli crunch salad that you'll see at, like, deli cases and stuff like that, it has so much mayonnaise. So what I
Yes.
love about this recipe is there's no mayonnaise. It's a broccoli salad without that. It's not creamy, so it's vegan, so it's so friendly to so many people. It's gluten-free. So the dressing, what she does that I find very interesting is she adds ras el hanout to the dressing, or she says
Very
baharit.
interesting.
Yes, ras el hanout is like a North African spice. It has turmeric and cinnamon and clove and coriander and cumin. Every spice blend is a little bit different. It's a little bit spicy. I think there might be chili in it too. So she gives you some alternatives if you don't have that. But I really, really love this spice. And I feel like it's worth trying out a little if you've never had it before. Just on roasted vegetables, it's lovely. But she puts it in this dressing: vinegar, shallot, garlic, maple syrup, olive oil. Like, so a beautiful kind of classic vinaigrette, but with this spiced element. Then what she does is she takes the broccoli and she tells you to basically get a pan super hot, and you've cut your broccoli into small florets, and you toss it in the pan in a little oil on high heat for 2 minutes. So you're just like charring it and heating it a tiny bit, but it's still vibrant. It's still crunchy. It's still almost raw.
Yes,
It's such an interesting step.
I don't know that I would ever think to do that, but it's like,
Yeah.
again, she's a genius,
And I feel like you could get away with not doing it if you didn't
right?
wanna do this step. I feel like this is for you to play with, but I think that charred note in a broccoli is so delicious, and I really think that's why she's adding it, even if she's not explicitly saying that. So then you throw those, like, charred broccoli pieces in a bowl, and you add to them drained cannellini beans or chickpeas.
Wait,
So
there's beans in this
she
too?
didn't mention this in the title, but then in the
What?
ingredients, there's a can of beans. I'm like, "That's so interesting," because now it's almost a meal. Then you have your, like, chopped or torn medjool dates or any kind of good date, and then your chopped toasted pistachios, and then you add either cilantro or mint or both, and then you have this, like, punchy, spicy vinaigrette. Doesn't that sound so good?
That sounds so good, and my brain immediately goes to, that is like a perfect potluck dish. Like, making that ahead of time, putting it in, like, a beautiful bowl and showing up at someone's house, or, like, going to a picnic or a party with that, like, people are gonna be kind of stopped in their tracks, because I think I appreciate your hard pitch for Ras El Hanout or for, like, one of these spice blends. I think that's a place. It's funny, like, we've had we have listeners who reach out to us, and I had a listener who had emailed us about how, like, if it's not in her pantry, she's not going to make this recipe. And I
Yeah.
think this is the kind of recipe that you could really convert people with. Like, if have them taste, because if you're not going to go out and buy this spice blend, like, for someone like us, like, taking this to a party and sharing it with people is interesting.
I mean, yeah, and I'm supportive if you don't feel like buying new things for your pantry for one recipe. I really get that. But the reason I urge it is like, yes, try it in this, but then just try it sprinkled on some vegetables. Try it added to a little, soup or to some chicken as a marinade. It's so good. So, yeah, to me, it's worth it.
It sounds amazing. Sonia, you know how much I love toast. And we also talked about how much I love broccoli. And, Parmesan, pecorino, broccoli, those things all go really well together. So a few years ago, I discovered this recipe. It's called pecorino fried bread with broccoli. And that really stood
Ooh.
out to me. But what we just call it in my house is broccoli toast. And I don't feel like that's a good sell. I definitely sold this recipe the first time I made it, but we do make it a lot. And it's based on a restaurant dish that Melissa Clark experienced and developed for home cooks. And what's kind of amazing is how simple it is, and how actually, like, we eat this on weeknights. Like, this is a great dish if you're trying to just eat more like a meatless Monday. Like, it feels decadent, but it's actually also has a lot of virtue in it. And I also love that you can make it all in one pan aside from the blanching of the broccoli. So you take a skillet, you heat it up, you add some olive oil, you toast some bread. But you kind of add like a good enough amount of olive oil so that it kind of like soaks into the bread and makes it crispy. And the other piece that you really want to do is when that bread comes out of your skillet, you want to rub it with a little bit of garlic. I love
Oh,
that
yeah.
garlic. I
Classic.
love that garlicky bite. It's such a classic. So you set that aside, and then you blanch some broccoli. And then really the next part is so simple. You just, once your broccoli is blanched and drained and all that good stuff, chop it up. And then you saute it in a little bit of olive oil with anchovy, garlic, chili flake, and then the broccoli. And this takes like 2 minutes because you're not really trying to cook it anymore. You're just like adding these flavors to it. And on a weeknight, what you do is then you just put put your broccoli mixture on top of your bread and serve it for dinner. But I've actually served this for cocktail parties too, because it can all be made ahead of time.
Wait, but
And
what happens to the pecorino? Do
oh
you
gosh,
add that?
I totally forgot the pecorino. Yeah, I'm so sorry. So yeah, thank you for stopping me. Yeah, so it's just you add like a good amount of grated pecorino. You really want it grated. You don't want shreds because then it gets into the little broccoli florets. And so once your mixture is, has been cooked and all put together, you just toss that in the
Oh,
skillet.
you toss the pecorino in the skillet?
You toss the pecorino just in the broccoli and then
Whoa.
you just spoon it onto your bread. And this is the place where I also like in terms of technique, I like to chop the broccoli up really small because you want it to lay nicely on your bread. And especially if you're going to serve it for a cocktail party, which I have done. So you can make all of this ahead of time. You fry your bread toasts, you rub your olive oil on them, you lay them all out onto a sheet pan, and then you blanch your broccoli and you toss, cook it with the anchovies and the garlic and add the pecorino, toss that all together and lay it onto your toasts. And then that can sit on your counter for 4 hours, 5 hours. And then when you're getting ready to serve it, put it into a hot oven for 10 minutes and warm it up. And people lose their minds at these toasts. They're so, and like it's as good for a cocktail party as it is for a weeknight meal because again, it's basically just bread and broccoli, but it's so delicious.
So, I mean, good toast, like something on a good piece of bread with a lot of olive oil or butter with some vegetable element and some cheese element is a meal. And it's like one of my favorite kind of simple, quick meals. And I love that I can visualize this. But I think the other thing that's so interesting, it's so simple, it's almost obvious, but just having anchovies, just that one additional ingredient can take something like sauteed broccoli and make it interesting and feel like with this recipe, if you weren't like a toast person, because not everyone is, like Jonathan's not really into like, he wouldn't be excited about toast for dinner if I served that. But you and I would be. And
Yes, totally.
we've talked about his preferences before. But so if you weren't a toast person, still the idea of simply sauteing broccoli with this addition of anchovies is going to make such a big difference in a simple vegetable side.
Well, and it's that same idea of umami. It's not anchovies are not nutritional yeast, but it's this and parmesan, but it's all that same umami flavor, which goes really well with this bitter vegetable. And it just adds to your point, it just adds this layer of flavor where you're like, oh wow, like what is that?
Yeah, because you
And
don't taste the anchovy. It's just that umami and that saltiness and brininess that elevates the vegetable.
yes, and I will say I have a hard take on, as you know, I love a hard take, but I have a hard take on using pecorino. I have used Parmesan. It's fine. The pecorino is something better. There's something like more round about that flavor. It's not as bitey. And it just like grated pecorino romano is like what you want in this recipe.
I think it goes well with a lot of broccoli dishes, and it's more affordable often than Parmesan. So I love having it in my fridge too.
And it
Well, I
lasts
want
forever.
you say that part again.
And it lasts forever.
It really does. Well, I want to take us into a totally different direction for my last offering, which is controversial, but it comes from Alice Waters, who is not controversial. I feel like Alice Waters, again, anything Alice Waters does with produce, I trust. And so she has this wonderful recipe that I just love from The Art of Simple Food. I think that's the name of her cookbook. Sorry if I got that wrong, but it's a long cooked broccoli. And in fact, Samin Nostrat did a version of this for the New York Times that's long cooked vegetable, where she walks you through many, many different kinds of vegetables you can do the same technique for. But what you do is you take 2 pounds of broccoli and you put that in a pot with a hearty amount of olive oil, lots of garlic and chili flake and water, and you simmer it for an hour until it basically becomes mush, which is sort of an Italian take on certain kinds of vegetables. And then the idea with this like kind of like borderline pureed vegetable, this like meltingly soft, oil rich, the kind of decadent vegetable that's now no longer bright green, obviously. It's a little bit of a sadder color, but it can then be tossed as a sauce in a pasta dish, in a simple like weeknight pasta dish, or it can be done on crostini or bread. That's one of the things that's suggested with like a little bit of cheese on top. So I just think it's such a nice way to think about broccoli differently, that it doesn't have to be such a quick preparation.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you reminded me of this recipe. And I remember when Samin Nosrat wrote this article, and it was really like an ode to vegetables, even vegetables that have kind of like are past their prime. And it's a
Right.
way of coaxing out, of really making use of what you have on hand, and it's almost against the tyranny of like crisp, tender vegetables, right? It's like there's something about, I like the word that you used, melting. Like it's this sweet melted vegetable, and it isn't bright and crisp and tender, but it's like I've actually never made this with broccoli, but I've made it with green beans, and it's really
Oh, yeah.
delicious
I love
that
a
way
long
too.
cooked green bean.
A
Actually,
long
it made me think of your zucchini recipe, the one that you shared before where you cook zucchini down forever and then you add
Yeah.
that to pasta. Isn't it a similar idea?
Yeah, it's a similar idea, and it doesn't take an hour, but there is just, I love like the richness of olive oil, and that you're really making use of what you've got in your fridge. And you could do this with pristine broccoli. You can do this with broccoli that's like, a little past its prime, but it's a way of making use of what you have. And I do like how they do suggest like you could do this over a little bit of pasta or a little bit of toast. They also say you could do this over croutons, which I kind of love. The idea of like crispy little bites of crouton with like this soft veggie puree, like it in some ways it's almost like a personal meal. Like you would never really serve this. It's like a family
They
kind of
may mean I
meal.
feel like they mean, like, those big wide I feel like they mean crostini, like, little, like, piece, because sometimes they're called croutons, but I agree. I think it'd be more a personal meal. This isn't for me the cocktail party dish. This is, like,
No.
true home cooking.
This is true home cooking. Well, in true home cooking fashion, I do want to offer a broccoli taco option because broccoli, potatoes, tacos, and hot sauce are kind of many of my favorite things. And I found this recipe a couple of years ago, and it's almost like more of a suggestion. Like I never thought to put all these things together until I saw this recipe. And it's from the New York Times. We'll link the recipe, but basically it's like roasted broccoli, crispy roasted potatoes. You put it into a taco, you add a fried egg on top, and then you add whatever you want. You can put, avocado, you can put salsa, you can put hot sauce, all that kind of stuff. Their recipe kind of encourages you to like chop up your potatoes a little bit smaller and have them kind of more bite sized. And what I like is like, it's basically a vegetarian taco that feels kind of luxurious because it's not like, there's like all these big pieces of like crunchy potatoes and then broccoli. And I will say, like, we like to top them with a fried egg. I equally like them with a scrambled egg.
Yeah, I make a lot of vegetable tacos, actually. I really like a sweet potato, like roasted, diced, crispy sweet potatoes with broccoli. I'll do broccoli, and then I like to get just, like, I don't even bother with an egg.
I was
Like,
going to say, do you ever add eggs to them
I
though?
really don't. I don't mind having, like, a vegetarian taco and then maybe a side of refried beans or even simply cooked beans and rice. To me, that's a satisfying meal, especially if I have, like, a good salsa or guacamole and some, like, herbs. I'm really satisfied with that.
But what I like about this is like the heartiness of it, because I think if you're thinking
Yeah.
about like a ground beef taco, right? If you're like making a ground beef taco and then you're like, how do I pivot that to a vegetarian version? I mean, this to me is like one of the best entry points to like a meatless Monday because instead of chopping up your broccoli and just kind of like cooking it with some potatoes, you've got like chunks of broccoli and crispy potatoes. And you don't need the egg, but the egg kind of gilds the lily, especially if you've got this like fried egg and the runny yolk if you like that, which I do. And then just like your good hot sauce, like there's really not much more that you need.
I also love what you're describing because I feel like this dish could work any time of day. It could be a breakfast taco, it could be a lunch taco, or it could be a dinner taco, and it would be equally delicious at any time. And this conversation is making me so craving broccoli.
I can't wait to make all of these, my favorites, your new ones that you've introduced to me to. I think it's a great place to feel a little bit more virtuous while still indulging.
There we go, Jonathan, with your virtuous influence. Virtuous or not, I think that it's really fun to have some new ways to use this kind of fridge staple. Like, who doesn't have broccoli around? And now there's some fun ways to put it to use.
Totally. Well, until next time.
Until next time, bye.
Bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.